The following narrative has been weaved together from the writings of John Alden Loring, who served as the field naturalist for the Smithsonian Roosevelt African Expedition of 1909-1910, and includes the stories of a fatal encounter with lions and a fight with 5 lions. Within a day after our arrival in camp, our porters had given each member of the Roosevelt African Expedition a name that corresponded with his duties. Colonel Roosevelt was Bwana Mkuba, or the Big Master. Kermit, his son, was Bwana Magdogo, or the son of the Big Master. Dr. Mearns was Bwana Doctoro. Heller, who took care of all the large specimens, was Bwana Ngose, the Skin Master. And I, whose duty it was to study the habits and preserve the skins of small mammals, most of which came under the head of rats and mice, was given the undignified name of Bwana Panya, or the Mouse Master. In the eyes of these natives, the position of Bwana Panya was a most degrading one, for they could not understand of what use the skins of rats and mice could be to anyone. They thought that I was wasting my time when on all sides there were herds of zebras, wildebeests, hartebeests, and other game. We were camped on the North Nguasso Nero River in what is known as the Sotik country of British East Africa. About 3 miles away was a Maasai kraal, or village, a circular enclosure of thorn brush against the inside wall of which was a row of mud-daubed huts. The Maasai are a pastoral people corresponding to the Navajo Indians of our own southwest United States. They abhor work of any kind, and subsist entirely upon their droves of sheep and goats and their herds of humpbacked cattle. Because of the presence of lions, leopards, and hyenas, the Maasai keep their cattle inside the kraals at night. During the day, they drive them out to feed, under guard of half-naked youths armed with spears or bows and arrows. Having had considerable experience in hunting big game in Alaska, in northwestern Canada, and in western United States, I joined the Roosevelt African Expedition with the impression that we, who were all experienced hunters and properly armed with modern firearms, had little to fear. And I think I am safe in saying that our entire party felt much the same way. But after we had reached Africa and heard of the number of men who had been killed or mauled by lions, and of the wonderful vitality, quickness, and courage of these beasts, we began to realize the danger. With the exception of crocodiles, lions kill more people in Africa than all the other so-called dangerous animals combined. There are several reasons for this. First, more sportsmen hunt lions than other dangerous game. Second, they are more numerous in close proximity to man than other fierce animals. Third, when wounded, they do not hesitate to charge and rarely turn back. Fourth, because some of them acquire the man-eating habit. The mortality among the natives from man-eating lions is of course very great. They are a simple, childlike people who think of peril only when it stares them in the face and forget about it half an hour later. They have no newspapers, it is true, but they know as soon as a man-eating lion appears in the vicinity, and they must appreciate the danger. Yet they roam about at night, the greatest danger time, without weapons or lights. They even sleep in the open, or at the best, in low thorn brush enclosures over which a lion can easily spring. A single man-eating lion has been known to kill more than 30 natives within 6 weeks or 2 months' time. Few white men are killed by man-eaters, for white men seldom venture far from civilization without firearms, and when on safari, outfitted men, they sleep in tents, keep fires burning at night, and armed guards watching over the camp. In late December, I was camped with a small safari in the Lucania Hills, 2 days' march from Nairobi, and one morning discovered 2 strange Kikuyus in camp. From the headman I learned that they were members of a party of men and women that was on its way to Nairobi. About midnight, they had been attacked by a lion and had scattered. The 2 men had wandered about for several hours, but finally saw our campfires and came over to stay until morning. They did not know at the time whether the lion had killed anyone, and as we broke camp and left about 4 o'clock that morning, we never heard. Just before daylight, we heard the hoarse, guttural grunts of a lion back in the hills, a half a mile from camp, so we supposed that it must have been successful. After a man-eater becomes known, the government usually closes the roads in that section to travelers and forbids the natives to visit the region until the animal has been put to death. Frequently, there is a white hunter in the vicinity who is glad of the chance to kill the brute, but it is needless to say that the natives give the hunter all the information and assistance they can, for the death of a man-eater is received by the natives with much joy and celebration. Very often, the game warden at Nairobi is called upon to exterminate a man-eater. With a party of natives, he goes to the scene of the last tragedy, and if possible, they track the brute to a clump of bushes or tall grass to which it has gone after its gruesome meal. The patch is then half surrounded by the natives, who march through shouting, thrashing the brush with clubs, and throwing stones in advance. If the lion is in the cover, it is forced out at the other end and killed by the waiting game warden. It is a well-known fact that the very same party of men whom a man-eater may have raided the night before can, in daylight, drive it before them like any ordinary lion. Experienced English hunters prefer attacking lions from a distance. Of course, if the ground is such that by standing off 200 yards or more, there is danger of the animal escaping, they try to get closer. But they reason that the farther away the animal is, the less apt it will be to charge, and if it does charge, there will be more time to shoot. While it is true that the nearer one is to a lion, the more liable it is to charge, close shooting has its advantages, in that one's aim is more accurate and the bullets have greater penetration. A young Englishman with whom we became acquainted shortly after our arrival in Africa was, a few months later, frightfully mauled by a lion. He went hunting one afternoon and suddenly came upon a fine maned lion. At about 100 yards he opened fire, and the beast charged. The hunter emptied his first rifle and snatched his second gun from the gun-bearer just before the lion reached him. This rifle chanced to be of a different make from any the gun-bearer had ever seen, and he had neglected to throw back the safety catch. Before the hunter could rectify the mistake, the lion bowled him over and knocked the rifle from his hands. The gun-bearer snatched it up and tried to fire. Then, with wonderful courage and presence of mind, he rushed to the struggling pair and, holding the gun over his master, shouted, "Master, fix this gun. It won't work." The lion was chewing the man's left arm, but he managed to reach out with his free hand and throw off the safety catch, and the gun-bearer shot the animal through the head. The Englishman was badly mauled. He was in the hospital for several weeks and nearly succumbed to blood poisoning, but finally escaped with a few ugly scars and a crippled left arm. It is a well-known fact among professional sportsmen that the lioness is more to be feared than her mate. She is far more willing to charge, even though she may not be wounded. When a pair of lions is found, the female, therefore, is the first one that old lion hunters kill first. A charging lion is, to my mind, the most noble and at the same time the most awe-inspiring sight imaginable. Contrary to general belief, a lion does not bound towards its enemy. It scoots or glides along over the ground with a speed simply remarkable for an animal so stocky and with such short legs. The true lion hunter can always tell whether a lion is actually charging or is simply trying to escape, even though it may be coming towards him. When trying to escape, a lion lopes along in an easy but not extremely rapid manner. But when he gives his tail a flirt in the air and starts towards you with his belly almost touching the ground, his forefeet reaching out like those of a pacing race-horse, his jaws half open, and with every step emitting a deep guttural growl which strikes you in the chest and goes right on through, then he is charging. 99 times out of 100, he will not stop unless you kill him, so govern yourself accordingly. If, when you start out lion hunting, you think the time will come when you will have to run, stay at home, for unless you have a companion who can help you out of a scrape, should you ever turn your back on a charging lion, that's the beginning of your end. The best you can hope to do is to postpone death for a few seconds, and unless your rifle is empty, you had better stand your ground and fight to the last. But Mr. Lion is not a half-bad fellow after all, unless he happens to be a man-eater, and then only at night when he is sure that you do not see him, and he knows that he has the advantage. Otherwise, he will not molest you if you treat him with respect. A very small percentage of the people that are mauled by lions in what the English term accidents, that is, sportsmen on whom the tables have been turned, are killed outright or even die from the seriousness of their wounds. Most of them succumb to blood poisoning. Lion bites, when in the fleshy part of the body, are usually deep, and the tissues of the flesh are torn apart to such an extent that treatment is difficult. Unless a doctor is at hand, the worst form of septic poisoning appears in a short time, and the patient is doomed. Our doctor attended 3 cases of lion maulings within 12 hours after the accidents happened, and though he was provided with the proper medicines and instruments, 2 of the men died from blood poisoning. Our safari was so large, and there were always so many campfires burning at night, that we were not molested by lions. One night, the askari, or native ex-soldier who watched over the camp and kept the fires burning when we were in a lion country, woke us up by firing his rifle. I snatched my gun and ran out of the tent. The askari was back by the grass hut that the porters had built as a protection against lions for the horses. He said that he had shot at a lion that was prowling about the camp. He watched it for some time, and as it circled around the horse shed, he supposed that it intended to attack the animals, so he fired. Several porters that ran from their tents saw the beast, however, and they were confident that it was a hyena. While campfires are acknowledged to be the best protection at night against lions, there are many instances when these cats have scarcely heeded them. Men have been carried off while sleeping inside a brightly burning fire, and cattle have been attacked within a circle of campfires. Heller took care of the colonel's large animals, so whenever an elephant, a hippopotamus, or a rhinoceros was killed, he would take his skinning tools and enough men to carry his camping outfit and go out to the place and camp until his work was finished. Usually the porters returned to the main camp the same day, leaving him alone with his 4 native assistants. Several times while on these trips, lions, attracted by the smell of flesh and blood, paid him visits at night. They would circle about his tent, grunting, growling, and purring, and if he was camped near the skinned carcass of an animal, he could hear them fighting over it all night. But usually there is little danger from a lion that announces itself by grunting or growling. The animals that are dangerous are those that are never seen or heard until after they have snatched a man and made away with him. One night, 2 lions came to call on Heller when he was armed with only a shotgun and a few shells of birdshot. He very wisely shut the flap to the tent door and sat in silence listening to them grunting and purring. They passed around his tent several times, while he and his porters, who were in a nearby tent, kept perfectly quiet, and finally the cats departed. Not far from Nairobi, there lives an Englishman in one of the typical East African sheet iron bungalows. Several living rooms lack connections, so in passing from one room to another, it is necessary to step out on the veranda and walk to the door of the adjacent room. One evening, a guest for the night arrived and left his wagon standing by the side of the veranda, opposite the door of the room that he was to occupy. The 2 men talked well into the night, and then the guest bade his host good night and stepped out on the veranda. He had reached his room, opened the door, and was standing on the threshold, when a lion that must have been watching the men through the window sprang at him from behind the wagon. The beast miscalculated, however, for it failed to clear the vehicle, fell upon the porch, and sliding across it, struck the door with such force that the guest was sent sprawling to the matting, and the door closed safely behind him. The rifles were in another part of the building, and as neither of the men dared to venture out of his room, they had to content themselves with shouting to each other through the partition and let the lion depart at his will, which he did in a few hours' time. In the Guaso-Niero country, we met a Boer who was traveling through the land trading cattle with the Maasai. Not long before this, a lion had crept up to his camp one night and sprung at a sleeping ox driver. The boy was covered with 2 pairs of blankets, and in its haste to escape, the lion made a hurried grab and ran off with the blankets only. In the same locality, lions once chased a zebra up to a settler's house and killed it within 50 feet of his doorstep. There were 4 or 5 lions in the bunch, and though the man used up all of his ammunition trying to kill them or frighten them away, he was compelled to lie in bed most of the night listening to them. We met the same man a few weeks after leaving the region, and he told us that he had come to Nairobi to buy a horse to replace one that lions had killed in broad daylight the day before and within a stone's throw of his house and our old camping site. One is somewhat disappointed on hearing his first lion in the African wilds. If he expects to hear them roaring as they do in circuses or zoological parks, he will discover his mistake. In the 11 months that we spent in Africa, I do not recall ever hearing a lion roar. Lion hunters told me that they sometimes do, but rarely. Time and time again we heard lions at a distance, but they gave only deep guttural grunts, first long and slowly uttered, then shorter and shorter and quicker, until they died away entirely. In fact, the grunts were the short, deep notes that always follow the inspiring roar of caged lions. In British East Africa, the chief prey of lions is a zebra, and most of them are killed at night. The big cat creeps up to its horse-like prey and with a sudden spring or a dash pounces upon the victim's shoulder. Reaching over with one forepaw, it seizes the creature's nose and with a sudden wrench breaks the neck, or causes the animal to tumble and the neck is broken by the fall. Zebras are short-winded, and they are so abundant that it is not difficult for a lion to secure a meal whenever he wishes one. Next in abundance to the zebra is the hartebeest. And these 2 animals, at the time of our visit to Africa, were so common that they were a pest to the settlers. They break through barbed wire fences and destroy the crops to such an extent that the settlers welcome sportsmen. One settler said to me, "While Colonel Roosevelt's writings will be of great benefit to us by encouraging other sportsmen to come here and shoot the animals, on the other hand, he has done us an injury by shooting the lions. If the 15 lions that your party has already killed had been allowed to live, in a few months they would have exterminated more game than you will get during your entire trip." Another settler argued that the shooting of lions was of benefit, for as he said, some of them might become man-eaters and kill scores of natives. Part 2. A Fatal Encounter with Lions. To fully appreciate the danger of lion hunting, a person should visit the little cemetery at Nairobi, British East Africa, with someone who can show him the graves of those unfortunate hunters who have been killed by these mammoth cats. Gruesome though such an experience may be, it serves as an object lesson to the green hunter who has just arrived in the country and proves to him the need of being cautious, cool, and accurate in his aim. I feel safe in saying that inexperienced sportsmen do not at first realize the great danger of lion hunting. They take it for granted that 1 or 2 well-placed bullets from a modern, high-power rifle are sufficient to stop the charge of any so-called dangerous animal. Such is often the case, but again, several balls in vital spots will fail to kill a lion before it has succeeded in killing the hunter. It is too often true that sportsmen who are killed or are mortally wounded by lions have placed their lives in jeopardy by following wounded animals into thickets or into tall grass, where the meeting is almost certain to be at close range and unexpected. And yet many an inexperienced lion hunter has been mauled when the conditions were such that an accident, as the English call a mauling, seemed impossible. Some African tribes of natives do not hesitate to attack lions with spears, even though they know that usually it will result in the death or serious injury of one or more of their party. We were camped in the Sotik country on the North Guaso-Niero River, where lions were abundant. One afternoon, a young Englishman named Chapman, who was traveling through the country, selling and trading sheep with the Maasai tribe, camped nearby. We spent a pleasant evening together, and during the course of our conversation he mentioned that he had never shot a lion but was anxious for an opportunity. He showed us an antiquated single-shot rifle and asked if we thought it was powerful enough to do the work. We expressed a doubt. The following morning he broke camp and moved over to a Maasai village some 20 miles away. About supper time 2 days later, I stepped to the tent door and, gazing across the veldt opposite camp, saw a man leading a mule on which was perched a very wobbly object resembling a native. As they drew near, I discovered that it was Chapman's tent boy leading the animal and that the wobbly object was a porter. They slowly plodded into camp, and the tent boy handed Dr. Mearns, our physician and surgeon, a note from Chapman. The doctor opened the letter and began reading, while the injured man, his arms and legs bandaged in pieces of cloth, was helped from the mule and immediately sank to the ground. The note told us that Chapman had attacked a troop of lions in a thick brush and wounded 2 of them, one of which had charged the party and mauled the porter. The poor fellow was badly injured. Both of his legs and arms were bitten and scratched, and his thumb was crushed. Dr. Mearns washed out and sterilized the wounds, then wrapped them in clean bandages, and we made the man as comfortable as we could. The tent boy was then sent back to Chapman's camp with the mule. At breakfast time the next morning, who should appear but the same boy, this time riding the mule. He carried another note from his master saying that after the fight the Maasai had attacked the lions and that 2 of the men were badly mauled. He wanted the doctor to come over as soon as possible and treat them. The doctor left immediately and returned later that evening, and this is the story he told. Chapman had camped near a Maasai kraal, and after selling the villagers a few sheep, he asked them if they knew where there were any lions. They took him to a thicket that eventually proved to be the lair of a troop of lions. It was then late in the evening, so the Englishman decided to postpone his attack until the following day. Soon after daylight, Chapman returned with his boys and a Maasai spearman, and sneaking up to the thicket, he saw 2 half-grown lion cubs playing at the skirting. He opened fire and wounded them, but they bolted out of sight into the brush before they could be dispatched. He circled the brush patch several times, but did not find them, so he determined to send in the boys to drive them out, a very dangerous undertaking. Reluctantly, the boys entered the lair and began shouting and beating the brush with sticks. Chapman, on the outside, a few rods in advance, waited for the lions to appear. Half of the thicket had been driven over when a beater found one of the lions dead, and it was dragged into the open. This discovery somewhat encouraged the men, and they returned to the brush more willingly. There still remained about 100 yards of the thicket to be driven, yet so far only 2 lions had been seen. Chapman was beginning to think that the ones he had seen the evening before must have escaped during the night. Suddenly, a large lioness stepped from cover and calmly stood gazing at the Englishman. As he raised his rifle and took aim, 2 more lions appeared some distance farther on. Chapman fired, and when the bullet struck the lioness, she gave a deep, hoarse growl, and wheeling about, charged him. The distance between them was so short that he did not have time to reload. The infuriated beast was almost upon him, when one of the porters in the edge of the brush jumped from cover directly in the path of the charging brute. The poor fellow discovered his mistake too late, for as he turned to run back, the lioness reared, and burying its teeth in the man's shoulder, bore him to the earth. The man and the cat tumbled about on the ground, while Chapman worked frantically to reload his rifle. And at that moment, the Maasai spearman bounded up to the struggling pair, crouching behind his rhinoceros hide shield. He poised his spear in the air and drove the steel shaft into the lion's body. Growling savagely, the lion dropped its victim and turned upon the Maasai. Chapman had reloaded by this time, and he managed to shoot the animal through the shoulder before it had a chance to maul the guide. Chapman's narrow escape convinced him that he had better not attack any more lions with his single-shot rifle, so after attending to his wounded porter, he started back to camp. He had only gone a short distance when he met a party of Maasai warriors who had been attracted by the shooting. They were heavily armed with their tribal weapon, spears. After they heard what had taken place, they wanted Chapman to return with them and kill the other lions, but he refused to go. The Maasai were insistent. They said that they would go whether he accompanied them or not, so finally he gave his rifle to one of his boys and sent him back with the natives while he continued on with his wounded porter. On arriving at the lair, the Maasai warriors took positions on the outside of the thicket and sent several men inside to drive out the lions. In a few minutes, the shouts of the beaters told that a lion had been started, but the animal kept closely under cover, so there was no opportunity to spear it. The beaters had worked along to the end of the thicket, when suddenly a large, black-maned lion rushed from the thicket within a few yards of two warriors. Both men hurled their spears at the animal. One of them missed his mark, but the spear from the other struck the lion in the flank, and it turned and bounded back to cover. The lion could be heard snarling, growling, and thrashing about in the brush in an effort to extract the spear from its side. From the swaying of the bushes, the Maasai saw that the animal was working its way into a dense part of the thicket, so they thought it best to leave it in hope that it would soon die from its wounds. The beaters worked around behind the wounded lion, as they supposed, and again commenced to beat the brush for other lions. They had not given the spearmen time to properly distribute themselves since the last encounter. However, only one man had reached the far side of the thicket when a deep guttural growl was heard. The next instant, the wounded lion bolted out of the brush close to the solitary spearman, and catching sight of him, threw up its tail and charged. The Maasai, crouching behind his shield, his spear poised in the air, waited until the brute was almost upon him. Then, with a gentle flirt of his wrist, he sent the keen-bladed weapon into the lion's shoulder and out on the opposite side, fully 18 inches. The lion struck the uplifted shield, and reaching over it, seized the man by the shoulder, and the two sank to the ground. Had the other spearmen been present to follow up the attack, the man's life might have been saved. As it was, after he had once thrown his weapon, he was helpless, for these people carry only one spear, relying upon their kinsmen for help when needed. A 16-year-old boy who chanced to be tending cattle nearby had been watching the hunt, and was only a few rods away when the lion attacked the Maasai. Seeing the plight his comrade was in, he rushed to his assistance, and with only a knob stick for a weapon, began beating the great cat on the head. 3 blows were sufficient to make the shaggy-maned creature leave the man he was mauling and spring upon the brave little herder. Only a few moments elapsed before a score of spearmen arrived and riddled the animal with spears, but the poor little fellow had been mortally wounded. Dr. Mearns made 3 trips from our camp to the village in an effort to save the lives of those 2 natives, but both of them died of blood poisoning. When the news reached us that they were dead, the doctor said, "Loring, during my career as an army surgeon, I saw and heard of a great many cases of bravery, but never have I known a boy so young to voluntarily enter a conflict which he must have known meant certain death. It seems a pity that such an act of bravery should pass without some recognition from a civilized people." Part 3. A Fight with 5 Lions. Soon after the British took over British East Africa, a large number of Englishmen emigrated to the new colony and took up homesteads. Among this number was a family consisting of a father, a mother, a boy of 18 by the name of Fritz, and a second son of 14. They settled on a beautiful strip of veld at the west side of the Moa Hills. Naturally, the first duty of a settler is to build a suitable farmhouse, and as the owner of the new farm was a carpenter by trade, this task was made much easier than it is to most homesteaders. Labor, with the exception of the unskilled and slow natives, was expensive and hard to get, and as the family was of limited means, every member helped in building the house. But let Fritz tell the story as he told it to me. It was Saturday afternoon, and we had all been working hard that week. Father and mother mixed the mud mortar and laid the stones for the foundation of the house, while my brother and I, with the stone boat and a span of oxen, hauled the stones from a cliff a half a mile away. We had made 4 trips that day, and were well tired out, for it was no easy task prying up the heavy stones and rolling them down to where the boat stood at the edge of the veld. The sun had been beating down upon us as only a tropical sun can shine, and the perspiration soaked our clothes and caught the rising dust and dirt, so that when the afternoon was over, we were 2 tired and grimy boys. We had been trying hard to take out another full load of stones before dark, but I soon saw it would be impossible. as my brother, who was not very strong, appeared somewhat overcome by the heat and the hard work, I told him that he might return to the tent, our temporary home, and I would put the half load on the stone boat and follow. By the time I had finished loading the boat, Jim had disappeared, and I started for the oxen grazing on the veldt several hundred yards away. I yoked them up to the boat just as the sun went down behind the hills, and with the crack of the big bull whip started them towards home. They needed no guiding when once headed towards the kraal, and as their normal gait was not much more than a mile and a half an hour, I seated myself on the stones and put in the time gazing at the scenery. About halfway between the quarry and our tent was a mass of rocks and boulders on the hillside, many of them the size of a house. These crags were the home of a little band of cliff springers that I had discovered soon after our arrival in the country, and we had decided to protect them as much as possible, for it was a pleasure to watch them scampering about the rocks. For want of something better to do, I began to scan the crags in hope of seeing some of the tiny antelopes at play. And sure enough, there they were, 8 of them, some feeding quietly in the grass plots among the rocks, others standing like statues on the tops of boulders, gazing at me. Suddenly, 2 of them took to their feet and bounded up the rocks with remarkable agility, and the rest quickly followed. When well in the cliffs, they stopped on points of vantage and looked down at something a little to their right. I knew that they had not taken fright at me, for many times they had allowed the oxen to pass within 100 yards without paying the slightest attention to the team. So I began to search for the cause of their alarm. I was not long in discovering it, for suddenly a lioness appeared among the rocks, then another and another, until in all 4 lionesses and 1 fine, shaggy, black-maned lion had come into view, all slowly sauntering out of the rocks for an evening's hunt. Their actions showed plainly that they had seen the bullocks, for every few seconds one or another one of them would stop and gaze at us, while the oxen, innocent of any danger, plodded onwards. To hurry them was almost certain to provoke an attack, especially if the lions were in the least hungry, so I simply let the animals jog along at their leisure. As soon as the lions emerged from the rocks, they followed along parallel with me, but a little behind and about 300 yards distant. Although they seemed in no hurry, they were slowly overtaking the team. The wind was blowing from them towards me, but the lions' scent had been carried behind the oxen so that they did not catch it. Suddenly, however, one of the lionesses crouched low and began to creep towards the team in true cat-like fashion, and an instant later a second one followed her example. I then realized that they meant trouble, but I had no time to reflect, for at that moment one of the oxen stopped short, threw up his head and sniffed the air. Then, getting the scent, they both broke into an awkward swinging shuffle for the kraal. Over the rough, uneven ground we tore, bumpety-bump. I clung to the stones to keep from being thrown off, and tightly gripped the big bullwhip, my only weapon of defense. There was no use in trying to guide or control the oxen. In fact, I had no idea of doing so, even if I could. For under the circumstances, they could not get back to the kraal any too soon to suit me, even if they did run away. All that I could do was to cling to the stone boat and await the lion's attack. It was a short race. Those who have seen a lion capture its prey know too well what little chance there could be for a runaway team of oxen hitched to a loaded stone boat. The foremost lioness charged from right angles, and when within 15 feet of the boat, sprang into the air and landed squarely on the shoulders of the near bullock, dug her hind claws into his side, threw her front paws over his back, and buried her teeth in his neck. The poor creature went to the ground as if shot, and rolling over on his side, bawled in the most pitiful manner. By this time, a second lioness had rushed in from behind, and I turned just as she was about to spring at me, to all appearances, but she leapt clear over my head and landed squarely upon the back of the bullock, already down. The fall of the wounded bullock brought the stone boat to a halt, and the frantic struggles of its frightened companion broke the yoke. Away he went over the veldt just as the third lioness came charging up. She, too, was coming straight for me, but seeing the loose ox that had veered off, she changed her course for him, and as she passed me not 10 feet away, I brought the bullwhip over her back with all my force. Without altering her course or slackening her speed in the least, she turned her head and showed her contempt by snarling as she shot past. A second more, and she had overtaken her prey and pulled it to the ground. The 2 other lionesses had killed their bullock, and for the first time I realized that they were likely at any moment to attack me. So I jumped from the stone boat and bolted for home as fast as I could run. I had gone but a few steps when I looked back and saw the black and shaggy-maned lion coming behind at a terrific pace. There was no mistake this time. He surely was after me, for there were no cattle in the line of his charge. It was useless for me to try to outrun him, and to continue would only give him courage. Realizing this, I turned and faced the brute, and as he came to within a few 100 feet of me, I cracked the bullwhip as loud as I could. This had the effect of stopping him at 15 paces from me, and there we stood, facing each other like 2 gladiators, the lion lashing his tail, wrinkling his nose, and snarling, while I kept cracking the whip in his very face and backing off slowly. The big cat seemed to lack the courage to follow up his attack, but stood there threatening me until I had gained several paces on him. Then he crouched low, his shoulder blades protruding above his back, and slunk off to the right in an effort to get behind me. I kept facing him, however, and finding himself baffled, he stood for a second and then came for me like a shot, growling hoarsely, his jaws wide open. At the very instant that he was about to spring, the whiplash all but cut him in the face, which again brought him to an erect position. Once more I began backing towards home, and again gained several yards before he came to his full senses. He was getting accustomed to the harmless crack of the bullwhip, and I knew that soon it would have no effect upon him. At his present rate of progress, it would be but a few minutes before he could get within springing distance, and if once he sprang at me, I should be as helpless as a mouse in the jaws of a cat. I was debating as to whether I should make a rush at him in an attempt to intimidate him, when I heard a shot from behind me. The lion fell to the ground, mortally wounded, but raised himself upon his forefeet and, growling savagely, began to bite at his side. Instantly I turned to run and saw father, some 300 yards away, spring from a kneeling position, snatch from the ground beside him a second rifle, and start towards me. We ran for each other at the top of our speed, and as we met, father handed me a rifle, and I turned back to make war upon my enemies. At the sound of the shot, the 2 lionesses had left their kill and were slowly sauntering off, stopping occasionally to look back at us. The other, however, was still tearing away at the dead bullock. We ran up to within 100 yards of her, and while I drew bead on her, father began shooting at the 2 farther away. My first shot went wild, but as the lioness turned to run, I caught her with my second bullet, back of the shoulders, but too high to be fatal. Instantly she wheeled and came for us, grunting and growling in a most awe-inspiring manner. Father, in the meantime, had got in 2 shots at his lionesses and had wounded 1, but seeing my lioness charging, he also began shooting at her. The bullets seemed to have no effect whatsoever, for although we could see that we were hitting her, she never slackened her speed. On she came until within about 60 yards, when she slowed down, her head sank to the ground, and she fell dead. Instantly we turned our rifles upon father's wounded lioness. She was more than 300 yards away by this time, and making towards a clump of thick thorn bushes. Before she reached it, however, a bullet from father's rifle struck her in the hind leg. She disappeared in the thicket, badly wounded. The back of the black-maned lion had been injured by the first shot fired, and during the fight with the other 2, he had been growling and snarling and trying hard to reach us, but we saw that there was no danger to be feared from him. Father then suggested that since he had tried his best to make a meal of me, it was my right to finish him, so I advanced to close range and planted a ball in his heart. Even then it was several seconds before he threw up his head, gave several gasps, and fell dead. A wounded lion in a bush is a dangerous adversary, even in broad daylight, and in the dusk of the evening a man would be foolhardy indeed to attack one, so we decided to let that one remain until morning. It was then that I learned how father chanced to appear on the scene at the critical moment. My brother, on leaving me, instead of going directly home, had stopped at the edge of the rocks to rest. He had seen one of the lions come out of the cliff and had hurried home to give the alarm. We skinned the 2 lions that night and found the 3rd one dead in the thicket the following morning. Although we watched at the bullock carcasses that afternoon and the next morning, hoping that the lioness that we had seen escape, as well as the 5th one, which during the thick of the fight I had lost sight of and which probably went back into the rocks, might return to the body, but they disappointed us. We were, however, quite satisfied with 3 out of the 5.